All right, let's go ahead and get started. I'm sure some of you know at least one of these two people, the fellow on your right, but you may not know the man on the left. He's famous for delivering a talk that was based on answering this question. What wisdom would you try to impart to the world if you knew it was your last chance? His name is Randy Pausch, a father, a husband, and a computer scientist at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh. Randy had already been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer when he was asked to give a last lecture. It's one in a series where professors imagine what they would talk about in their final lesson. Now, most people don't deliver one under such pressing circumstances, which made his lecture even more compelling. His talk to students at his high school was recorded. It became a YouTube sensation. Soon he was on Oprah and Good Morning America, and then finally he came out with a book called The Last Lecture. Randy's story is remarkable partly because it showed great human resilience in the face of personal tragedy. He knew his time on earth was limited. He knew the day he would die, as he said, would be like pushing his family off a cliff. So he set out while still strong to do what he could to build a net that would catch them and cushion the blow of his departure. I picked out a few of his notable quotes from his lecture and book. Let's just read just a few of those. The key question to keep asking is, are you spending your time on the right things? Because time is all you have. Here's another one. Be prepared. Luck is truly where preparation meets opportunity. And to be cliche, death is a part of life and it's going to happen to all of us. I had the blessing of getting a little bit of advance notice and I'm able to optimize my use of time down the home stretch. Randy died quietly at his home in July of 2008, about 10 months after he gave his last lecture. He was surrounded by his family. I think it's safe to say he left his family and his children and the world with a deep personal message about his values, his beliefs, his wisdom, and not just for his wife and children, but really also his children's children. The chain of generations we all have a link in. I think if you could ever say that someone had a good death, it was certainly Randy Pausch. The details of Randy's death stand in contrast to those of this man, who we all recognize as the actor, producer James Gandolfini. You may remember him as Tony Soprano, the mafia crime boss and lead character in the HBO hit series The Sopranos. Unlike Randy Pausch, James Gandolfini died suddenly at age 51 while on a trip to Italy. It was a shock to his fans and to his family. No one saw it coming. Unfortunately, he hadn't done a thorough job planning his affairs. He left about 80% of his estate to his sisters and daughter in such a way that it triggered a painful $30 million tax bill. And unlike Randy Pausch, James Gandolfini didn't get to play a role in writing his final legacy. His ending had a strong resemblance to the controversial last scene of The Sopranos. If you're a fan, you may remember it. Tony arranges to meet his family for dinner at a local diner. First, his wife Carmela arrives, then his son AJ. Tony orders fried onion rings for the table while they await his daughter Meadow. Tony keeps looking at the door, checking for his daughter's arrival. The camera jump cuts to the daughter outside, trying to park her car, and then back to Tony. The tension builds. He keeps looking up. We're all wondering, who's going to come in the door, Meadow or a mafia hitman? And then finally, the screen goes black. The finale to the 6 season series ends. The storyline left unresolved. No deathbed scene, no final words, just a jarring cut to black, just as James Gandolfini's real life ended too. So, in the opposite manner of Randy Pausch, James Gandolfini didn't get to write his story for the ages. I hope you can see our little tale of two families here is a hint of the topics that we're going to touch on tonight, namely the importance and seriousness of thinking through your legacy and planning for the next generation. It's never too soon to do that. So I'm not going to take too long to introduce myself. The talk tonight is 6 Steps to Legacy Planning for the Generations. I'm Chris Hensley. I'm the owner of Houston First Financial Group. If you do recognize my voice, it might be from the radio show Money Matters, which is live on KPFT Houston every Friday morning at 11 a.m. We are also a international podcast. We actually get more listens and downloads outside of the Houston area through the podcast internationally than we do locally. You may be wondering, why is a financial advisor up here today talking about legacy planning for the generations? Well, I do this as a service to my clients and my community because I've seen some difficult, unhappy situations when families don't think about these issues. When no legacy planning is done, we've seen a range of unhappy outcomes that often impact multiple generations. We'll talk more about those in just a minute here. Of course, we don't want that to happen to you and your families. So that's why I do this presentation. I also want to assure you that this is not a sales presentation. You will not hear anything remotely close to a sales pitch tonight. You could see what we will cover tonight on the agenda there in your packet if we were live, but we're going to kind of go through an outline here of what we'll go over in the 6-phase process of legacy planning. Please note that I'm always trying to respect people's time, so I won't be taking any questions during the presentation, but we'll save that towards the end there. And before we end tonight, I will give you some more information about legacy planning. So if you are on the webinar version of this, you'll get an email giving you what's called a free legacy planning assessment that you can answer and then go through that as well. This is just a kind of a summary of the different articles that I've been published in, a little bit about me and Financial Advisor Magazine, KPFT. So let's keep going here. Housekeeping still. So 3 ways to schedule an appointment. You can visit us on the website, HoustonFirstFinancialGroup.com. Check yes on the webinar evaluation. You should all be getting an email after this. And there's a contact, what's going to say Calendly, and this is where you can book a virtual legacy appointment, and we've been really successful in implementing those through GoToMeetings, whether you're in Houston in the Gulf Coast area or if you're in other parts of Texas as well. You can also call Ryan Spanier. He is my assistant. His phone number is 713-804-5886, and he'll be able to schedule an appointment for you as well. So let's keep going here. It is important to talk about where legacy planning fits inside my practice. Many of you, if you're an existing client, you've probably already been introduced to the retirement roadmap system that we use. Over the 18 years that I've been doing retirement planning and investments for people, I've come up with a system and a structure to help people solve what we call the retirement puzzle. A lot of times people were very successful at the investment side. We are not so successful as retirees when it comes to coordinating our pensions and Social Security, Medicare, windfall elimination provision, all of these things that are almost ancillary that we need to keep on our radar. There's often fall off of our radar, and there's a reason for that. This slide, we've taken just a few decisions like long-term care, Social Security, Medicare, things that I know as I've worked with people who are near retirement or retiring, where people can make mistakes. And if it looks complicated, it's because it is. There's about 15 different critical decision points just along the idea of long-term care, Social Security, and Medicare. We haven't even mentioned the investments yet, which is most people's focus as we get close to retirement. They want us to answer 2 questions. How much do we need to retire? And when can I retire? And so it's not just always about those 2 questions. There's a lot of other stuff that we include in the retirement roadmap that are super, super important before you have the confidence to turn off the paycheck from your employer. You'll also hear me talk about something called the money cycle. And this is a mistake that a lot of people make. It's not intuitive necessarily. We are all taught in modern portfolio theory, the buy and hold, the idea that you've got your entire lifetime to save. But that should change as you enter into the 5 to 10 year period before you actually retire. The money cycle is something that we all go through during our lifetime. And there are three phases. There's accumulation, preservation, and distribution. The accumulation phase starts early in life when we are accumulating assets. We're typically willing to take more risk with this money because we have a long time horizon. We're working and we'll be working for a long time. If we have losses, we have time to make it back. Or if the market crashes like we're experiencing right now, we can wait for it to come back because we have a long time horizon before we enter the second phase, or what's called the preservation phase. But in the preservation phase, we start preserving some of the assets that we've accumulated throughout our lifetime. As we get closer to our retirement goals, now there's less time to make mistakes with your money or experience major volatility, because you're going to need this money sooner rather than later. This step prepares us for the third and final stage, distribution. The distribution phase is for both distribution to us in retirement and to our family upon passing. And so that's where it plays into legacy. This is when you begin to draw from what you've accumulated and preserved and start taking an income from your savings and investments. So you may have been very successful over your lifetime getting this bucket investment money, but as you move into the distribution phase, and it becomes not about beating the market or getting the best return, but it's a math problem of how do I get this money to last for the next 30 years? The biggest mistake that people make is going directly from the accumulation phase into distribution. They continue to invest as if they are preparing for retirement a long way out, when they're already retired or just about to retire. They're within that 5 to 10 year period. The problem with this is that if you're taking distributions when the market has big corrections, as it always does, as we're seeing right now, you're essentially forced to sell your investments for income when the market is down. You can never make that money back, and you could deplete your savings much faster as a result. This is how you run the risk of running out of money later in life. So let's get into the legacy planning portion. That was kind of a introduction into our retirement roadmap system and how that dovetails with our legacy planning, HFFG legacy. We can see one of the aspects of the problem that we face. Many people haven't thought through how they want their money and estate handled after they're gone. They think that they have forever. What could go wrong? And it's not reflected here, or people who have given it some thought, but not recently or not fully, as in the case of James Gandolfini. But things do go wrong. Maybe you died before you got everything set up. You got hit by a bus before you even had a chance to tell people you loved them, much less write a will or start writing down your memories. Terrible thought, right? It's just, let's just consider what could happen in the aftermath of an untimely death. Your family's left grieving and in the dark about what you own, where everything is at, and what your wishes are. Think about your closest next of kin, your spouse, your children. First, they're in shock to learn of your death, so they're mourning. They start going through your papers. What will they find? Is it a neat folder marked open in case of my death, with all of your assets listed and your wishes clearly spelled out, or a hodgepodge of papers that make no sense to anyone but you, and now you're gone? Or your estate planning documents are missing, incomplete, or in conflict with one another. Perhaps you never got around to making a will, so no one knows who you wanted your assets to go to. Or if you did sign a will, maybe it conflicts with your beneficiary designation. This happens. People update their will when they get remarried, but they forget to update their IRA and other investment beneficiary designations, which still list the ex-spouse. Let me ask you this: if you died tomorrow, how would your assets be distributed? Do you even know? Family members start arguing over what you would have wanted. Granted, you're not around to see the turmoil, but I'm asking you to imagine it now. without clear instructions from you, what would your family members say to one another? Would there be an argument over what you would have wanted? You may have heard of normal loving, you may have had or heard of normal loving families who turned on one another after a parent died without a will. It can bring out the worst in people. We've seen some really strange cases when it comes to estate settlement and when people pass away. If there's no will or trust, the estate goes into the probate process. This means that the court takes over and divides the assets based on state law. So this may or may not be what you want. Probate fees are deducted from your estate, leaving less for your heirs. If you were to die tomorrow, do you know if your estate would owe estate taxes? Perhaps one of the worst things to contemplate about sudden death is leaving special sentiments unsaid. There are people who say, I love you at the end of every phone conversation just to make sure it's the last thing said if they get hit by a bus. But that doesn't really do the job of telling your spouse, your children, your grandchildren, how you truly feel about them. Let me ask you this as well. If you got hit by a bus tomorrow, what things will you wish you had said to the people that you love? And in the end, the impact of your life is diminished between the confusion, family squabbles, messy estate planning, and all the things you wish you said but didn't. Your legacy comes up short. The aftermath of your death is not merely as positive as it could have been. What else could go wrong? Generational planning or legacy planning is a modern, intentional, and fun, even, believe it or not, two-phase process that does away with the worst aspects of estate planning and helps you plan your legacy. For some, a fate worse than death is sudden incapacity. You might suffer a stroke, you get hit by a bus, and rather than dying, you end up in a coma. In some ways, this is worse than dying, unprepared because you have to go on living. So, who will make decisions about your care? Someone you love and trust, or will you be at the mercy of someone you don't even know because you didn't set up things properly? Here's what can go wrong. Your medical wishes are not honored because no one knows what they are. Hospitals are obligated to do whatever is necessary to keep people alive, even if it involves ventilators and feeding tubes. If this is not what you would want, you have to state those wishes now. If you want to appoint a loved one to make medical decisions on your behalf, you have to set this up now while you are still of sound mind and body. And here's what else, your money is frozen. Your bills go unpaid and your investments are left unattended because you never signed a power of attorney appointing a trusted person to act on your behalf. No one else has the authority to transfer money or pay bills or do anything with your finances as long as you are incapacitated. So here's the problem. People equate estate planning with death planning, and therefore they block it out and never do anything or not enough. And I see this when I do financial planning and I sit in front of clients and we say, you know, we're going to do a couple of things on paper that we don't want to happen in real life. We're going to look at what happens if you become incapacitated, if you were to pass away, or if you entered into a long-term care facility. And as we talk about this, you can see hand wringing. I'll watch the body language and people will start wringing their hands. So there's a lot of anxiety around this topic. This quote sums it up. One of the greatest obstacles in estate planning is the perpetuating of death denial. Most people don't want to plan for post-death lives because death is a scary topic to even think about. This is true both on a financial level, but also more importantly on an emotional and a spiritual level, that lifetime of experiences, hard-earned wisdom, and insight that makes up our values never get discussed and never get passed on to the next generation. And that's the real loss for everyone. You may be thinking, well, my family knows how I feel about them, and I'm not a best-selling author or Hollywood movie star with tens of millions of dollars in the bank. So what's it matter if I don't take the issue seriously? What are the consequences? The consequences of having no estate plan are tragic. Lawrence Greenberg notes here, heirs may be subject to a number of obstacles such as probate, creditors, lawsuits, judgments, and legal fees, all of which can compromise the value of the legacy. Common problems that arise when no one thinks about estate planning could include no will or trust, overlooked provisions such as guardianship for minors. So if you're a parent, no tax planning, financial strain, cash shortage for survivors. And there's also these special cases. Sometimes decisions are not communicated to the next generation, details not revealed until after death. Family tensions arise after will is read, the reluctance to make the plan or update a plan. It's really not a good picture, which is why attorneys, accountants, and financial advisors have been pressing their clients for years to do estate planning. The benefits of estate planning are very real. It spells out healthcare wishes. The possessions go to heirs you choose without wrangling or dispute. It avoids additional unplanned legal expenses, and it provides for loved ones not otherwise protected. So traditional estate planning often doesn't capture the fullness of our lives and our values. And so that's when we start getting into legacy planning, and we'll talk more about that in a moment here. So what's missing are the intangible assets we've collected, often the fruits of our life well lived. They include two types of things not included in traditional estate planning, such as character assets, your values, health, spirituality, heritage, purpose, life experiences, talents, plans for giving, and intellectual assets such as your business systems, alliances, networks, ideas, skills, traditions, reputation, and wisdom. Now, you're possibly saying to yourself, that's a grim picture. We don't want that to happen in our family. Is there a way to achieve all these things, not just the nuts and bolts of traditional estate planning? And the answer is yes. It's called legacy planning or generational planning, and it recognizes that we are all much more than just our physical assets accounted for in our estate plan. So here's our definition of generational planning. Generational planning is a modern, intentional, fun even, two-phase process that does away with the worst aspects of estate planning and helps you plan your legacy. So generational planning has two objectives. The first objective is legacy planning. This is a process for passing on a family's tangible wealth and assets. That's the one that a lot of people think of right out of the box. The second objective, conveying your family's values and history to the next generation. Often that one gets left off. Both are done for the benefit of your next generation. It's also important to say that generational planning is not driven by documents in the way of a stuffier estate planning process or the estate planning process that all of us are used to. And so, in thinking about the people closest to you, here are some thoughts on key considerations to a successful legacy plan for the generations. First, consider your spouse if you're married. If you were to die first, you need to ensure sufficient income for the rest of your spouse's life, maybe through insurance or just making sure there are enough assets to draw from. You also want to make sure that whichever of you goes first, the surviving spouse would be able to manage the finances alone. You know, we see many cases where the husband makes the investment decisions and the wife pays the bills. This is a natural division of labor in a marriage, and they are each doing what they do best. Then one of them dies, and the other must take over without having been trained to do so. And the successful legacy, a married couple, while they are both alive, plan ahead and make sure that either spouse can carry on and manage the finances regardless of which spouse goes first. Children need to be prepared for their inheritance. We've all heard stories about trust fund babies and inheritors who have no appreciation or respect for the money that was left to them. Without the proper guidance, their tendency is to spend it rather than preserving it for their own future or for future generations ahead of them. Inheritance planning starts with an understanding of the basic values upon which the inheritance was built, which is to preserve and grow your family's wealth. These values need to be passed on to the kids. Then there are the practical matters of how to specifically invest the money and how to withdraw it without incurring unnecessary taxes and fees. As for the grandchildren, you want them to understand how you lived and what you lived for. Sometimes it's easier to skip a generation when passing on these values. Grandchildren usually have a greater appreciation than children do for what life was like when you were young and what you learned from your experiences. So seize the opportunity now to start sharing those family stories and conveying some of those memories and values that you grew up with. And finally, think about all the people you've touched in your life. Think about the causes that you care about, the organizations that are doing good work in the world and that you contribute to now, those things that you're passionate about. Maybe you'd like to leave something to them so that they can continue to those good works that they're doing. Naturally, you might be saying to yourself, okay, this makes sense, but how can I do this in a way that is not overwhelming, complicated, or extremely expensive? You don't have to be overwhelmed. We have a structure, we have a system in place, follow it. The 6-step legacy planning process to start leaving your mark for the next generation. Let me take you through just a quick overview of these 6 different steps that we have in this process. Part one involves planning for incapacity. We like to get this one out of the way first because it's so essential and so easy to do. Incapacity planning is so easy, it's surprising everyone hasn't done it. People of all ages should do it because an accident or a stroke could happen to anyone at any time. There are forms for this. For healthcare, all you have to do is state a few simple wishes about how you would want to be cared for and name a person to interact with doctors and make medical decisions on your behalf. This may be your spouse or one of your children or a close friend. Now, for finances, you would simply sign a power of attorney giving another person legal authority to act on your behalf. This would allow them to pay bills, transfer money, and do what's needed to keep your finances in order during the time you're unable to do it for yourself. Again, it can be a spouse, an adult child, a close friend, or even a trusted professional. You must be competent to sign these forms, which is why we want you to do it now. You have to do it up front. This is step one of legacy planning. Once you have this checked off, you'll feel much better. It'll be like a weight coming off your shoulders. Then you'll be ready to tackle step two. So let's talk about step two here. Step two is to get organized. You know, you've been meaning to do this, or maybe you're already pretty well organized, but not in a way that would make sense to your loved ones if you suddenly weren't around anymore. Your objective in this step is to prepare for the real business of estate planning. First, you'll need to identify all the property you own so that you know how to divvy it up among your beneficiaries. This includes your savings accounts, investment accounts, retirement accounts, real estate, business interests, significant personal property like jewelry and artwork, everything. Before you ever sit down with an attorney to have your estate planning documents drawn up, you'll need to have this list. Now, we work with a team of attorneys through Helios Integrated Planning. If you work with us through Legacy Planning, we will help you with the legal documents, and we provide a client vault where you can electronically store and organize your documents, and then you'll be able to share them with other professionals, attorneys, CPAs, your executor, executrix, whoever you feel comfortable to share that information with at your discretion. Another reason to do this is to determine if your estate will be subject to estate taxes. If it is, if the total value of your estate exceeds the estate tax exemption amount, you'll want to talk to your attorney about some of the legal ways to reduce or avoid estate taxes. If you were to go on the internet, you could read about so many celebrities who didn't do the proper planning and whose estate owed millions of dollars in estate taxes that could have been avoided. If you don't read about a particular celebrity's estate plan, it means they did it right. They set up a trust that both saved estate taxes and kept their affairs private. And of course, you want to make things easy on your spouse or children. Make it so that they have access to your important papers and passwords. Help them know what to do first, like take care of your pets or get your mail, In a non-legal letter to your survivors, you can say anything that you want. You can give funeral instructions, tell them what you want done with your Facebook account, tell them where the key to your home safe is, anything. We can help you with this through the legacy planning process. In part 3, you'll be thinking about the people you love and the causes you care about. Uh, this is in preparation for part 4, which is the real business of estate planning. For some of you, part 3 will be super easy. You want to leave everything to your spouse. You have 1 or 2 favorite charities that you might want to support, but you have to think about the contingencies. What if your spouse goes before you do? Do you want everything to go to your kids, divided equally among them or distributed according to need? What about grandchildren? What about other relatives or friends you may want to be part of your estate, or some of your prized possessions to go to? And what if you have special situations like a child you don't feel is ready to handle an inheritance, or a special needs child who would lose out on medical benefits if there were a large inheritance? These are all things that need to be considered before you start working on your estate planning documents. The more you have thought through your family and charitable wishes, the more efficient the estate planning process will be, and the more money you'll save. Also, in this step is the important process of preparing beneficiaries for the inheritance. Now, some families may want to be completely open about who's going to get what, while others may prefer to be more secretive to avoid family battles. Maybe it's better to have those family battles, if they're going to happen, while you're still around to mediate. In any case, you want the people who will be inheriting your assets to know how to manage them, to carry on your intent, to preserve and grow the assets and not spend them on frivolous things or lose them to taxes. This is the time to talk to your spouse and kids about what they might get if you die, and give them some lessons on how to manage their inheritance. This will be an extremely valuable part of your legacy. Now we get to the traditional part of estate planning. All these decisions that you made in part 3 about who should get what, and what will need to be legalized. That is, there will need to be a mechanism to transfer those assets to the loved ones in a legal manner. So let's look at that. Now, this isn't always done via a will. Sometimes you can transfer assets through account titling. If you hold title as joint tenants with rights of survivorship, and if one joint tenant dies, the property will automatically transfer to the other joint tenant without going through the probate process. Another way is through beneficiary designations. If you have an IRA, you've signed a beneficiary designation in which you name the person or persons who should inherit the IRA if you die. This also allows assets to pass directly to the beneficiary outside of probate and regardless of what your will says. There are several legal ways to transfer assets to the loved ones after death, but they all need to be coordinated. You may have some accounts titled jointly. You may have signed beneficiary designations. You may also need to have a trust depending on how complex your situation is and whether or not your estate is subject to estate taxes. You'll also need a will to pick up the leftovers. Some people's estate plans are very simple. They barely need to see a lawyer. They can do everything through an account titling, beneficiary designations, and what a simple will, what we call a mom and pop I love you will. Other people do need legal advice. We can help you make that determination. We can refer you to an estate planning attorney. We work with Helios Integrated Planning as part of the HFFG legacy process when we get to that stage of the process. Or if you have an attorney that you already work with, we will work with that attorney to coordinate things on our end, such as making sure that your accounts are titled properly. Depending on how much thought you gave to your beneficiaries in part 3, this step should be pretty quick and straightforward. It's a matter of executing the wishes that you already identified. Laying all this groundwork in part 3 will save on legal fees. At the same time, you don't want to rush anything. Talking with an attorney can sometimes make you aware of possibilities you didn't know about before, such as planning for contingencies or drawing up the documents so that they can't be contested. Good attorneys definitely earn their fees. Now we get to the fun part, creating your family legacy. This is where you really make your life count for something by leaving behind a piece of yourself. How you do this will be up to you. We have worksheets and guidelines that can get you started. You might start by simply capturing memories and writing down certain thoughts, such as what you want your children and grandchildren to know about you. You may be planning to compile family photos or favorite recipes to hand down. Maybe you have a special skill, such as gardening or woodworking, that you would like to pass on to certain family members. Now is the time to start thinking about these intangible assets that will make your legacy so valuable to your family. Part six comes later, but it's no less essential than parts 1 through 5. It's great that you're doing all this planning early, long before you plan to leave this earth, but that means a lot can happen between now and then. So you'll need to keep an eye on your plan and revise it if anything changes. Your plan is not set in stone. As your family composition changes, you'll want to revisit your plan. Whenever there's a life event such as marriage, divorce, a death, a birth of a child, adoption, you'll want to take a look at this plan, or you might change your mind about something. You can always amend your documents for any reason at all. Remember, having the wrong people inherit your money is almost worse than no estate plan at all. That's our 6-part legacy planning process. We're getting close to finishing, so let's review briefly. We started by looking at, I shared that story with you about Randy Pausch and James Gandolfini, and the key takeaway there was that your legacy is going to be written no matter what, for better or for worse. So let's make sure that we control the final narrative of our life, because things can happen suddenly, death or incapacitation. And we saw the consequences of not being prepared, the pain, confusion, and anger among family members that are left behind. Then we were introduced to the concept of generational planning, legacy planning, and saw how it differs from traditional estate planning. That led us into the understanding that the first step in generational planning is to ensure that our tangible wealth and assets get left to the right people or organizations. And then to do that, we've just introduced you to the 6 major steps in the legacy planning process. As you look at those 6 steps, you're possibly thinking that sounds like a lot to achieve. I feel that way too, because it is. But we found over the years that it's when we work together and guide people through this generational planning process, they experience 2 things. The first one is great relief that it's done. The second is new excitement and renewed energy to focus on the non-financial aspects of generational planning. This is the reflective part. It's not legal and it's not business. It's the part where we get to look back on our personal journey and share the stories that we carry in our hearts. This is the gift to our next generation. They may be words or stories, pictures or actions. They may provide hope. They may provide healing, but just as important are the things we say and do that bring us meaning, because we realize that we are the carriers of wisdom for our family. And for generation to generation, each of us link in that chain that binds our families together. And that link is the mark we leave. That's our legacy. And that's why I think many of you are listening here, and why I'd like to make a suggestion. Let's work together. Yeah, working together, we will develop a plan for doing the many things that need to be done. One of the reasons people don't get around to estate planning is that the task seems too overwhelming and they don't know where to start. So we would like to break it into chunks for you, where we set some of those goals and establish a timetable for implementing them. For example, in week 1, you might sign your healthcare directive. In week 2, you might sign the power of attorney for your financial decisions. We have a checklist that we put together for you of these things that need to be done to get your plan in order. And together we can go through that list and check things off as they are done. Working together will help you stay on track. We can also share resources. So if you need a referral to an estate planning attorney, well, we have our HFFG legacy team through Helios Integrated Planning. or if you're working with an attorney or tax advisor, we can introduce you to some of the professionals that we work with whom we know are good at what they do. If you're working with a CPA or an attorney, already introduce them to us so that we can help them become part of your legacy plan team. For CPAs that you work with, we can actually provide continuing education credits towards their licensing. By working together, we can hold each other accountable. We'll have frequent check-ins and deadline dates for getting things done. This is all for your benefit to keep you motivated and engaged so that you'll carry through on your plans. And we have a way for you to start even right now. You're going to get at the end of this seminar or webinar and a legacy planning assessment. So we'll in a minute you'll get that sent out to you, and we'll ask you to complete that because it helps us with our efforts to educate the community on this and other range of financial planning topics that we teach about. Imagine how you'll feel when your legacy is all set. A trusted person is ready to step in and help with healthcare decisions or financial dealings if it becomes necessary. Your records are all organized and accessible to your loved ones. Your spouse and other loved ones will be provided for after your death. By leaving behind both tangible and intangible assets, you'll be well remembered for your unique contributions to your family and the world. So legacy planning is not hard. You just have to get started. So let's work together. And that brings us to the close of the presentation. If you can finish your evaluation, which is going to be emailed to you, and meeting request form, which is electronically through Calendly, I'll be happy to go ahead and open the floor up to any questions that you have.